Português ira ukun haunirai durante tinang atus hat nen nulu nyalaran. Ihatinan rihung ida atus sia hitunulu resin 5 ami deklara aminia ukun rasikaan. Loren sanulu tuirmai Indonesia invade.
We're talking about a film called Beatriz's War, which is East Timor's first feature film. And I'm joined by Luigi Acquisto, who's the co-director and co-writer, along with Lurdes Pires, who was a producer on that film. This is East Timor now telling its story, but it chooses to do it by the retelling of a 16th century French story, set, obviously, in East Timorese circumstances. Why choose that?
Well, I mean, the background of the film is I'm Australian, obviously, but I've lived in Timor for 4 years. I've been going since '99, made 3 documentaries there, production coordinated Ballabo, and discovered or came across some great talent in the way of Iram Tolentino, who plays the lead role, and had worked with Lurdes for years and many others. So we said, let's make a film. And so I co-wrote it with Iram, but the idea was, let's just take a simple storyline and then work in the story of Timor, because I knew that if we started from scratch or the story was too personal in relation to Iram's own life, that can be very difficult to tackle. So we took the Martin Guerre story, which is a simple story of a young husband disappears, returns many years later, and people accept him, but the wife then starts to suspect he's an imposter.
Beatriz, how filana Beatriz? Agora ihanena.
Ami tinke buka fatinda bao. Wala bele tama he umedene.
What worked in France, in the 16th century, still works in Timor now. It's still a society based very much on animism, on superstition, on a lack of sophisticated technology in most areas. So someone returning after 16 years and not being immediately recognised is plausible, particularly after a war.
Medalha irane representa traição nebe itane belunsira halobat Timor. Ulumbot Australia, America, no Inglaterra.
One of the things that is amazing about the film, because it's an aspect that I think a lot of people don't think of in East Timorese society, are the divisions within it. And so after colonisation, once the Portuguese left, and then even then, facing the Indonesians. And so the two main characters in the film, it's a war story, it's also a love story. And the boy and the girl, they're from rival tribes and so on. And it's all of these sort of internal political things that you don't necessarily think of until you hear East Timor tell its own story.
What happened in that period, 1974, there was a carnation revolution in Portugal, of course. And that started the process of decolonisation in many countries, but Timor as well. And that opened up, it opened it up for a lot of these tensions and divisions to suddenly come into play.
Well,
and so
it's
there
the story
was
of just about
war. Yeah.
Just about every post-colonial society has this. It's exactly what happened.
And then to some extent it happened again after independence in 1999, 2002, with the political crisis in Timor in 2006 to 2008, which, again, was an internal conflict rather than one against an external coloniser or invader. So the film addresses that to some extent, but more importantly, I think, it's the exhibition of the film in Timor that is addressing that issue and trying to contribute towards nation building.
In what way?
Well, many people in the resistance still are not aware of the role that other communities or other districts played in the struggle. And that's because movement was very limited during the occupation. Even with the military, they didn't know what was happening in one military zone or region to another. So many people think that they're the only ones who actually fought the good fight against the Indonesians. And that led to one of the reasons why there was unrest in 2006. The country was on the brink of civil war. It was a tension partly between people in the east of the country and the west. The east said, we fought the good war, you guys didn't. I mean, the reality is that the west is closer to Indonesian border, to Dili. The military forces were able to neutralise those areas a lot sooner. The resistance based itself in the east, further away, high in the mountains, and survived. So the film, by travelling around and through Lurdes and other people talking at these screenings, is, I guess, telling the people the story of Timor, that it wasn't just one community, that it was a common struggle. And I think that is helping to educate people, particularly youth now, who may not know a lot about their own history, but also older people who are, are starting to understand that it was a common struggle. It wasn't just us, and that, there needs to be a unified sense of how the country needs to move forward.
How both ho resistência sira. Tinan hirak na ba difícil tebes. Panghira to tinan rihung ida atusia hitunulu resinsia. Sira oho ami barak. Rihung barihung. Kabarak makmate tambah mlaha.
Tell me about the making of it. Because, as I understand, you didn't have electricity. You didn't have access to electricity.
No.
You want to create, you're filming in remote places. This is the first film the country's ever made. So there's not like there's this big industry that you can tap into, this wealth of talent and experience. So what do you do?
Well, Lurdes came in a little bit later. Stella and I, Stella's my wife and co-producer, and we ran a number of workshops for about 12 months. And then from that point on, we started, to try and raise the finance, and then Lurdes came on board. And Lurdes is too modest. I have to explain. Lurdes is the same generation as all the leaders in Timor. She went to school with them at a time when not many people went to schools, and certainly not a good school. She used to boss them around. So even though she doesn't have those sort of political ambitions, she can walk in to the head of the Army's office, whom we've been trying to get an appointment with for 4 months. Not myself personally, but our Timorese colleagues. Lurdes will walk in, kiss, how are you, how are the kids, here's a list of what we need. He says, oh, no worries, darling, sign off. Here, let's talk about the old days, and gives it to his assistant. And within a day, we've got trucks, we've got decommissioned weapons, we've got uniforms, we've got 12 men to help on the film, etc., etc.
Hatudo Tomak! Hatudo ba Indonesia! Hatudo ba Italian rasi katek! Ita povo ida que bele! Povo ida que brane fono!
We haven't been able to tell our story. We fought for many rights. And one of the rights we now have is to be able to tell our own stories. And I've had a lot of stories, women telling my women colleagues, telling me what happened to them. And for the first time, when you put the screen up in the districts, we have a mobile screen, and put the screen up, and the people can see their faces, their people, their story, their actors, and their language.
Even their actors playing the Indonesians.
It's quite exciting.
Yes. Which was amazing. Did any of them struggle with that?
Well, the Indonesian captain, Sumitro, is played by Gaspar Sarmento, who's a very close friend and not an actor. He'd never acted before.
No.
The actor we had,
and that's his first role.
That was his first role. And he, the actor we had lined up, pulled out. He was too busy running a business. But I think he was actually too scared to do it.
Dia orang Timor atau orang Indonesia?
Bawalah dia.
Jawab! Dia orang Indonesia atau orang Timor?
Saya orang Timor. Bunuh saya!
We always saw Gaspar in that role, even though as a person, he's the opposite. And so we cast him, and he agreed to do it, and he did a fantastic job. But he is from that district where the massacre happened. There's a massacre in the film.
The central massacre.
Yeah, the central massacre.
Which I understand, so Prabowo had something to do. He ordered this massacre.
Allegedly. But there's no direct evidence linking him to giving the order or actually participating in the killing.
But there are direct links between the actors and their families' stories.
Yes.
And these massacres.
Oh, definitely.
And now they're playing the bad guys.
Yes.
in the massacre that their family suffered in.
Yes, I mean, in Kraras, a village where we actually filmed the massacre scene in the village where it happened. And so there were 3 men who played extras in the massacre scene who were there on the day 30 years earlier and survived. They were children, but they were buried under bodies. When the Indonesians left, they crawled out and escaped.
So what was their attitude when they were doing this? Were they delighted to be part of this?
They
were really proud. And
proud to represent their fathers,
their
sons, well, not their sons in this case, but their families and fathers who...
So they didn't feel conflicted or squeamish about it. It was like they were reclaiming this for themselves.
When we were getting the men ready to do the reenactment, I guess,
of the massacre.
The massacre scene, yeah.
I had said to this young man that he was okay, he could take part, and he kept coming back. I was ready to scream. And he says, sorry, the only reason I want to bring my son is that when they killed my father, he was holding me.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
You didn't scream at me, I'm sure.
It was a very emotional day that day for all of us. Gaspar, who plays the Indonesian captain, is Timorese from that area. I say stand by, roll camera. Betty Reese, the co-director, calls action and nothing happens, because he's in tears, he can't continue. Another time then Betty broke down and then the whole crew broke down.
Yes.
And many of the women who were there, because the massacre involved all the men, babies, male, but all the males in the village, 270 that day. And then thousands more in the months that followed throughout the district. But the women survived that day. But many of them took part in the filming. They choreographed the massacre. And then there's a ceremony called a korametan, which means untying the black, which happens 1 year after someone dies. And we filmed that as part of the story. And there was one woman, and normally what happens is 12 months after a loved one dies, you remove your black garment, and it signifies the end of mourning. This woman removed hers on camera and spoke in her language, not Tetum, but the language of that area, said a few words because she was one of the elders. And we discovered later it was the first time she'd removed her black clothes in 30 years.
30 years.
And she did that for the camera.
Liatebes makne, non bahira itatemine se tatoliba mundo, maromak se irona, sada makakontese hane, a justiça se iha.